Okay, so let's have a quick read. A survey was taken of a group of 44 students, each of whom was studying one or more of the three subjects history, geography and art. 28 studied history, 30 studied geography, 22 students studied art, 6 studied history only, 15 studied both history and geography, 3 studied all three subjects. Right, so first question is, use a Venn diagram to find the number of students who studied history and geography but not art. Right, so first thing we have to do is draw a Venn diagram. So we're going to start by drawing a rectangular shape for the universe. Now the universe represents all of the data that's being studied. So in this case we're talking about a survey and there's 44 students being studied. So the total number of students is 44. That's what goes here. So important thing to remember is that the universe represents everything that's inside here. So it's the sum of all the data that's inside here. Next thing we need to think about is what sets are we going to use and how are we going to draw them. So this is a survey about students and what subjects they're studying. Studying three subjects, so we're going to need three sets. One for history, one for geography and one for art. Next thing you got to ask yourself is, are these sets overlapping each other? In other words, is it possible to study both history and geography, and is it also possible to study history, geography and art? If it is, then all the sets have to overlap each other like follows. So you can see they're all overlapping each other, so if somebody studied history and geography, that would go in this part here. If they studied all three subjects, it would go right in the center here, and so on. Right, so this is history, geography and art. The next thing I always do is I try to figure out what goes right in the center here. In other words, the students who studied history, geography and art. So let's look back over the data. I think this one here corresponds to the number. 3 students studied all 3 subjects. After that, it doesn't really matter too much the order in which you do things. So I'm going to start off by putting in these values here, the total amounts in each set. So you can see 28 studied history, 30 students studied geography and 22 studied art. The idea at this stage is to put in as much data as you can find into the diagram. So I'm going to go on to these guys now. 6 students studied history only. So history only would be this section here. In other words, they didn't study either geography or art, so it couldn't possibly be in this area. It's only in this area. So we put 6 in here. So next we're told that 15 students studied both history and geography. Well, if they studied both history and geography, then they'd have to be within the overlap of the 2 sets, history and geography. So the overlap is this section here. So in other words, the people who are in this section studied both history and geography. Now that means in this case there's 15 people in this section, but if you notice we've already put in 3 people here, so we'd have to put the remainder 12 in here. So at this stage we've put in all the data that we've been given. There's nothing else, no numbers there that we haven't already dealt with. So let's go back to the question again and just see what they were asking. So it says, use a Venn diagram to find the number of students who studied history and geography but not art. So the students who studied history and geography would be within this section, but if we mean the students who studied history and geography but not art, then it can't be within this section. So really the section we're talking about is here, the 12 students. These 12 students, yes, they did study history and geography, but they definitely didn't study art. So that would be our answer for this part of the question. So part 2 asks us, how many students studied history and art but not geography? So history and art would be this section here, but not geography would mean actually it would only be this section because we can't include geography. So this is really what they're asking for. What's the value that goes in here? Now, as we haven't been told any number from this information, we might as well just put in the letter X to represent the unknown value in here. Now here's perhaps the confusing part about this question, because usually when you get these kind of questions, you end up with an equation whereby the universe, in this case 44, is set equal to the sum of the elements within the universe. That's usually the way you solve and find out what a value of x is. Remember, anytime you're using an x, you want to get an equation, and usually when you solve the equation you find out what x actually is. But you need to know that it's not always this equation that helps you solve the problem. Sometimes you can use another equation. So you just got to look around to see, is there any equation that I can find that would make sense? So the one I would bring your attention to is the fact that we already know the total for the data within this set. The total is 28. So we could actually make an equation. We could say 28 must be equal to the sum of all these guys. That's perfectly reasonable. That gives us an equation with just x in it, and when we have an equation with just x in it, we can solve that equation. So therefore we can say that 28 is equal to 6 plus 12 plus 3 plus x. 6 plus 12 plus 3 plus x. And then if we simplify that down, we just add these guys, we get 21. And we take the 21 across here, so which means we're going to minus it from 28. So 28 minus 21 gives us 7, so x is equal to 7. So if we look at the question again, we see that we're asked to find out how many students studied history and art but not geography. So history and art but not geography would correspond to the x value here. So x is 7, we've answered the question. So now that we know that x is equal to 7, let's change this x to a 7. Okay, so let's have a look at the last question. It says find the number of students who study geography only. So what area are we talking about here? Well, it has to be this area. They don't study history, so it can't be in here, and they don't study art, so it can't be in here. So geography only, this area. So we need to find the value that goes in here. Now the easiest way to do this is actually to put in an x value here, an unknown value, and then you can kind of work out what this is by subtracting these three guys from 30. Right, so let's work out what goes in this area by figuring that out in our rough work. So we're going to take the 30 here and we're going to subtract these three values. So if we add these three, we put them in brackets first of all, because we're taking the sum of all these from 30, we need to put brackets around them. So 12 plus 3 gives you 15, and then if we minus everything inside the brackets, that becomes 30 minus 15 minus x. See, if you multiply a negative by two positives, you get two negatives. Now that gives you 15 minus x, so we can put that 15 minus x in here now. Now you might say, well then can't we just make an equation like we did with this set here? Can't we just say that 30 equals the sum of all these? Well, you could do that, but if you did that, then you notice that there's an x and a minus x. Those x's will cancel each other out. Therefore, you can't find out what x is. So that won't work in this case. What we have to do now is to use the more conventional method of setting the 44 here equal to the sum of everything inside here. So we just have to find out one more value, the value that goes in here. And we do that by taking all of these guys from 22. So again, we add all of these guys up, which gives us 10 plus x. Then we minus that, so that makes it minus 10 minus x. All of this then adds up to 10 minus x. Now if you remember at the start of the question, it says a survey was taken of a group of 44 students, each of whom was studying one or more of the three subjects. So each of the students was studying at least one subject, therefore there can be no student who didn't study any of the subjects, so there will be no numbers in this area of the Venn diagram. Now, right, so how do we find x? Again, as I said before, we need to use the conventional, the usual way you do this, which is to set the total of the universe equal to the sum of everything within the Venn diagram. So in other words, 44 equals the sum of all these guys. Now I'm going to show you a shortcut method for doing this. So normally you'd set 44 equal to the sum of everything in here. But instead of doing that, what I'm going to suggest is let all of this equal to 30, because you know that the sum of everything in here is equal to 30. So we can say that 44 is equal to 30 plus 6 plus 7 plus 10 minus x. So if we add all these guys up, we get 53. Now, to solve this, we're going to bring the x over here to make it a plus x, and we're going to bring the 44 over here to make it minus 44. So finally we can say that x is equal to 53 minus 44, which is 9. And if x is 9, then 15 minus x must be 15 minus 9, which is 6. So the value in here should be 6. Therefore we can say 6 is the number of students studying geography only. And this answers our final question. So remember, in this question there were two main things to remember. One, it's not always the case that we use this equation here, where we set the universe equal to the sum of everything inside. Sometimes we might be able to say that the total of a particular set is equal to the sum of the elements within that set. That's another way of making an equation.